Hey, everybody. Welcome into our week 11 waiver wire live stream. That's what we're doing right now. I'm sorry. I just got done with the podcast. I can't keep it all straight. You may notice that the other part of our screen looks a little different than it usually does. Usually it is Kyle Yates, analyst extraordinaire. Yates, unfortunately, is not able to make it today, but don't worry. We brought in a heavy hitter. Samantha Previte. Did I say that right, by the way? Is it Previte?
Perfect.
I mean, I definitely didn't ask
Chef's
you
kiss.
30 times before we started, if that's how you pronounce it, because that would do. Samantha does great stuff over at the New York Post. You should definitely be following her on Twitter. Oh my God. What is your Twitter handle, Samantha? I'm the worst.
At Samantha NFL.
That's pretty easy. Samantha NFL. She does great work over at the New York Post. Again, we were talking about the fact I'm from New York. So I certainly keep in touch with the Post, but she does great work. She was gracious enough to join us here for our waiver wire live stream. So Samantha, are you ready to get into it? Any questions? Anything you want to say to the audience before we get into it?
I'm so ready. I'm really happy to be on here. I love your site. So I'm pumped.
I like starting with flattery. That's the way we like to do things. That sets the tempo really well. So let's get into it. We're going through our waiver wire pickups right now. It's a big week as fantasy managers try to save their season, and they're heading maybe into the playoffs as we get closer. So let's just start with your number one overall pickup. Who is it this week?
I am going to go with Nyheim Hines. So he just looked absolutely fantastic, I think, against the Titans on Tuesday night. Led the Colts in touches ahead of rookie Jonathan Taylor, who I was so high on going into the season. Like, my heart
Can you
breaks.
explain this to me? Can you explain this to me, by the way? Because we have been like the Jonathan Taylor fan club over here. We're like, you got to hold him. You got to hold him. The schedule is so great. Eventually, he's going to start running into his own offensive lineman, and he's going to get outside, and it's just never happening. Are you dropping Jonathan Taylor out of curiosity, or are you still holding him?
I'm holding him because maybe it's emotional at this point. Like, I have an attachment. It's sad because I think I was probably like, I was way too high on him, even what we knew going into the season. People were ripping on me for how high I took him in drafts. So I think I took him at the end of the second in like a couple of drafts, which is early. I know. So definitely,
that is bold.
Yeah, definitely disappointing. So Hines rushed 12 times for 70 yards and a touchdown and caught a receiving touchdown. It's just become like painfully apparent that Taylor, who had like 7 carries for 12 yards, is just not the guy. It sucks to say like, oh, we were excited about an injury, but of course, like when Marlon Mack went out, it just felt like it was like such an easy thing. Like, he immediately was going to take over this role coming from Big Ten, it just seemed all too perfect. And I guess it was too good to be true. So I'm going to say that Hines needs to be rostered in every league, especially with the Colts kind of seemingly picking up momentum on offense. Like, I felt like things were just not gelling, not meshing very well at the beginning of the season with Phillip Rivers. But yeah, they also have the Packers, Titans again, and Texans in the next 3 weeks, which is just like a really great, 3-game stretch. So he would be my first pick.
Realistically, this is what we've been waiting for Taylor. This schedule, right? You were like, look, they're going to come out of the bye. It's just going to be glorious. They're finally going to realize what they have in him. And instead, it's anybody but Taylor. And I thought it might have been against the Ravens, that might have been his game. He scored that early touchdown, but then he fumbled, and then it was all over. So let me ask you something, because this is what I struggle a little bit as I think about whether or not to pick up Hines. He had a very similar scenario in week 1, right? Where he had the 2 touchdowns and he got heavily involved. And we had our waiver wire show, and one of our analysts, Mike Tagliere, was basically like, this is the guy. I've been looking at research into this. This is going to be our guy. You got to spend a huge chunk of your remaining fab on him going forward. And then he got 1 touch for 4 yards going forward. Are you concerned about that? And is it something where you are concerned, but regardless, just given what happened, given the landscape at running back, you still need to make him your priority pickup?
I would say slightly concerned, like maybe like a 2 or 3 out of 10 concerned, because yes, he's had like 3 2-touchdown games and then like no touchdowns in between. He's like the Darius Slayton of like running backs.
Yeah.
But that said, like, his workload outside of like week 2 did increase. Like, it seems like he's just going to be involved in the passing game. We knew that. And then at the same time, like, watching him Thursday night, he seemed to like really pass the eye test for me. So I think he looked like the better rusher than Taylor, unfortunately.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it just feels like like for now, he feels like the guy. And yeah, it's a little bit tough to trust this backfield just like based on its composition. But at the same time, like you said, the landscape is tough. He's going to be, I think, your top ad.
So this is a really difficult question as we're into week 11, okay? Because when, we always ask the fab percentage that you'd be willing to spend because, some people start with 100, some people start with 300 like I do in a couple of leagues. And depending on where you are right now, percentage of fab is kind of meaningless because you're basing it on how much other people have left. But I guess just sort of in a vacuum, like what, in terms of, what we expect to see from Hines, what general percentage of your fab do you think you'd be willing to spend on a guy like this?
At this point, it's like also by that logic, it's like you only have 3 weeks left to spend it like feasibly. So you kind of like, you could really blow as much as you want, like the rest of your budget. But I would say like, I would feel comfortable with like 20 to 30%, which feels high, but we're late in the season. So I think like, if you're really in the hunt, if you are like 5-5 going into this week,
Sure.
like, I think that you probably do need to make some bolder moves. So I don't hate it if you're spending, 30% of your budget this week.
You got to win your week. That's what we talk about all the time. And for running backs in particular, I talk about this a lot. People are probably annoyed by it by now. But the fact is, with running backs, I look much more immediate need, right? Because I think, especially now, I mean, we're into week 11. But I think when you look long term, we have no idea what things are going to look like long term. I put aside the COVID issues, which, of course, you have that coming up all the time. We don't know what things are going to look like in a couple of weeks. You take your wins when you can get them. And you have somebody like Hines, who you're confident is going to sort of at least be somebody who you can use in the short term and has the long-term potential, because it certainly doesn't seem like Jonathan Taylor. And again, they know what they have in Jordan Wilkins. They've had him on the team for 3 seasons, right? They're not going to be like, oh, wow, look at this. It's not like he joined a new team like Raheem Mostert and they were like, wow, this undiscovered gem that we never knew about. Nah, dude, you've been there for 3 years. They know already what they have. So I don't hate that whatsoever. Hines is my second running back pickup, but it is a 1A, 1B situation for me. Yeah, my number one is Salvon Ahmed. And again, Myles Gaskin is out at least this week. Everybody's expecting him to be back in week 12 because, of course, he was on IR, expected 3 weeks. But we have seen many times you're expected to miss. I mean, we were talking about Joe Mixon earlier on a podcast that just recorded, and it was like Joe Mixon had this vague foot sprain that nobody could pinpoint and was dancing on the sidelines and has been out a month and may not even be back this week. We don't even know. So I'm not taking it for granted necessarily that Myles Gaskin is going to come back. I guess when Gaskin comes back, that Ahmed's long-term value is probably capped, okay? Because Gaskin has done nothing to suggest that he's, not capable of holding load. But for now, I mean, Ahmed got 21 carries for 85 yards and the score. He got 1 catch for 5 yards. So for me, I think when I'm going into week 11, at least this week, I'm a little more confident that he's going to put up production. At least it's against Denver. It's not a great matchup, but I think given his workload, because what I've seen with Hines before, where he gets a lot and then just didn't really the next week, I'm a little more willing to trust Salvon Ahmed. So is he your number 2 running back pickup for the week?
He would absolutely be my number 2 pickup this week. They clearly trust him in that feature situation, giving him 21 carries last week. The whole Jordan Howard thing was kind of baffling to me, but he was a healthy scratch last week and then they released him. Like, I don't what are you doing with him? It was kind of a little strange, but it's a great story too. He's like an undrafted free agent and he did pretty well, like, in that spotlight situation. So definitely agree with everything you're saying in terms of like there being at least like a better path towards opportunity, at least for Ahmed for this week. And yeah, it's like maybe not like the juiciest matchup, but it's still a good matchup. And that said, I'm like so in on the Dolphins right now.
Right?
They are just so red hot. So I want like pieces of this offense. So
yeah,
I feel really good about him this week. And yeah, so he would be like probably my 1A, 1B type thing.
Yeah. So we're just basically have it slightly reversed. And again, for me, the only thing is just that I have like, Colts PTSD basically going on, and not, sorry to use that term, but you know what I mean? Like I just, every week I feel like this is what I expect the Colts backfield to look like. I have been right none of the weeks. Basically, I never have it sort of pegged. If I think it's going to be Jordan Wilkins, it's Jonathan Taylor. If I think it's going to be Jonathan Taylor, it's actually Nyheim Hines. So for me, I would rather go at least for 1 week with Miami. Okay, so we both agree at least on our number 1 and our number 2 pickups, if not in the same order. Any other running backs that you're looking to add this week off the waiver wire that you think could provide value?
There's a lot of guys that are like meh after this. Like there is a big drop off to the next tier of guys that I would consider. Yep. I don't know if this is going to be a popular one, but I'm going to go with Gus Edwards. So Ingram did return from injury in week 10, but it was Edwards who led the team in touches. And he, it wasn't a lot of touches. He saw 7 carries for 42 yards, caught a pass for 31 yards. But this is a messy timeshare. I will say, like, as much as we want Gus Bus to like not be a thing, though, like as much as we would love John Harbaugh to like commit to J.K. Dobbins, like it just doesn't feel like it's going to happen. Nope. And it makes me upset. And I think it's a totally different situation from the Jonathan Taylor thing, because I actually do think J.K. Dobbins is a really good player at this point. So it is a little frustrating, but that said, I think he's just going to continue to have a role in this offense. It's also against Tennessee, which is a pretty good matchup. So I would probably go with him next. There's just like I said, like a number of guys. If we really think that Carson is out for this week, I would go with Alex Collins, but I don't know what his status is kind of going at this point. So
yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because Collins was a guy. So what we do is I get a waiver wire list overnight, kind of after Sunday night, as guys who are, for us, we usually use a 40% roster threshold for it. And Collins, I saw Collins' name and I was like, I don't really care about this. Like he was like last on my list. But then you sort of, the most optimistic human being of all time is Pete Carroll. And Pete Carroll, while there were optimistic statements heading into last week with the Thursday game, I don't know. I'm just trying to read the tea leaves a little bit. It does not sound great for Chris Carson or Carlos Hyde at this point. So let's talk about this. Let's say we knew right now that Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde were out heading in to week 11. They've got a Thursday night game. It's Arizona. It's a pretty solid matchup. Where would Collins rank on your list? Would he still be behind Ahmed and Nyheim Hines?
I would say, yeah, behind them, but a close third at that point. This changes the total landscape for me. If we knew that both of those guys are out, I would say he's definitely third behind those guys. I think this game is going to be high scoring. I think I saw that the Seahawks implied point total is like 32 points or something like that. So they're always high scoring. And I mean, I think that he'll definitely have a really, really healthy workload in that game. So I have no problem with people taking him, I guess, behind Ahmed in my ranking.
This is the way I view it when I look at the waiver wire. And we did it last week where I had Duke Johnson as my top pickup before we knew that David Johnson was even going to miss the game, or certainly before we knew he was going to go on IR. Let's assume that waivers run tonight, which they do in a lot of leagues. Some of mine run Wednesday, which I think leagues should switch to so we have more information. But if it's tonight and we don't know about Carson, I still think I'd make Collins my third guy, because Gus Edwards, yeah, you're right. He is going to factor in still. He's getting carries every time. He gets a lot around the goal line. But without an injury to someone in that backfield, I don't want to go near it for now. Like you're relying on the injury for me. For me, a guy like Collins, I'm not breaking the bank by any means. He'd still be third for me. But for now, even with the uncertainty, that's the guy I picked up in the same way that I picked up Gio Bernard. And I said that we need to pick that guy up just in case, because a guy's situation is so much higher than something else. We would really need, I mean, if Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde are out on Thursday, Collins is probably a better pickup, I would think, for at least this week than probably even if Mark Ingram were out. Gus Edwards would be for at least the short term. You know what I'm saying? So for me, I think fantasy managers should go and make that choice early on, even if it winds up being not worth it, because I think the upside is there. You understand what I'm saying?
Totally understand. You're convincing me the other way. So.
Oh, good. Because I've never once convinced Yates or Tags of anything in my life. So yesterday we did our waiver wire podcast, and I don't know if our audience listened to it, but it's on YouTube now as well. We had Scott Engel on. Scott Engel's number one running back pickup was Cam Akers, and he said he would spend 40% of his budget on him. Now, I have not watched the YouTube video yet, but I have to imagine that my face and Tags' face when he said he would spend 40% of his budget on Cam Akers was like jaw drop, right? Because that to me, it's crazy. He said to, and Scott's been around the industry forever and is a great analyst. He basically said that he thought they came out of the bye. The Rams intended to give Akers more work. Now, he didn't score any of the touchdowns. Those all went to Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson, but Akers led the team in carries, led the team in yards. He thinks maybe not immediately, especially not against the Bucs, but long-term, Akers is just going to run with the backfield, even without an injury. And Tags and I push back on that a little hard. So I'm wondering what you think about Akers' prospects as a pickup.
I literally made a whole TikTok about how much I hate the Rams backfield. Like how every week it's just a different order of those guys. Even if someone's out, like it just doesn't even make sense. And I know that, that is something that Sean McVay said they want to get him more work, but like how many times have we been lied to from coaches about workloads and stuff? So, I mean, it's hard. I have trust issues with like coach speak, of course. I don't know. It's definitely one of the uglier backfields. And I added him, deleted him from my waiver wire column this week, just because I was like, I get it. I get the process, but I just don't know. Like I only pick 4 guys a week. So like, okay. Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I think
you're being
really,
so
really aggressive.
You're being so diplomatic right now. And I love it. Because you're like, I do a waiver wire column and I did not have Cam Akers in it. And I don't want any piece of Cam Akers and I don't want him anywhere near my fantasy team. But you're doing it in such a way that you're like, but if you do, I'm with you. It's okay. It's fine. I feel the same way. I mean, and to make that point, by the way, he's my 4th running back on this, which just explains to me how I think it's Ahmed and how I think it's Hines. And maybe if you're really desperate for this week, Collins. And then I just don't really want anybody. Just leave them all there, right? All right. So we're in the same boat. So, okay, let's get overall. So overall, Hines was your number 1 pickup. Was Ahmed your number 2, or did you have a receiver or somebody else?
No, I think I would go Ahmed from here.
And then who's next after that?
Probably would go Michael Pittman from here, like on the overall ranking.
Yeah. But so you're go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I feel like a lot of these guys, like it's just, when it comes down to like Pittman or one of the 2 running backs we just mentioned, like it just comes down to like need at this point.
Yeah.
But I was really impressed by Pittman as well. Same game. Super, super fantastic second rounder. Caught 7 of 8 targets for 100 yards. He also rushed for like 21 yards. He didn't score, but he's like demonstrated some really great chemistry with Phillip Rivers, something that I think that we had all hoped T.Y. Hilton would and just didn't. So I think he needs to be rostered in every league moving forward.
Yeah, he's definitely my number 1 wide receiver pickup of the week as well. And I think number 2 overall. Yeah. I mean, if he hadn't gotten injured early on, he was a guy who I remember we were talking about him as, where he would rank on our waiver wire list. I don't remember when it was, week 2 or week 3, whenever, right before he got injured. And I'd put him up high because the upside is there, even though it's Phillip Rivers, of course, the upside was there given his talent. And it came through in this last game against Tennessee. He's the only pass catcher who you can feel comfortable rostering in that offense. And I think he's a guy for the most part that you can get away with starting pretty much each week. And I agree with you that it does come down to need, because if you need a wide receiver, Pittman Jr. for me is far and away the number 1 guy to get this week. What about Jalen Reagor? Because Tags loved Jalen Reagor as a pickup this week. He's about owned in roughly a quarter of leagues. He was number 1 for Tags, at least coming into this week. He's my number 2 guy. Are you in on Reagor this week, or do you think not even worth it?
I am in on Reagor this week. So I will say, like, the past 2 weeks for the Eagles have just been, like, it's been a lot. Like, little went right in this game for the passing game overall. I mean, like, that, I don't know. It's so weird. I was just talking about this. Like, Carson Wentz is a guy that gets so many excuses made for him. Like, he's like the anti-Dak Prescott. Like, Dak Prescott throws like 1 incompletion and then like Dak's overrated, like what a drama queen or something like that. And then like everything, like people just want to like apologize for Carson Wentz. Like, it's never like, he's never at full strength. Like the offensive, and yes, the offensive line is really bad. They rank 32nd in the league in like sacks per game. And that's, I mean, obviously a real thing. And they were kind of playing shorthanded for a while with a number of their weapons out, but they had everyone back last week and he still looked really bad. That said, I just think like, he led the team in targets. He's clearly a trusted piece in this offense. I think there are better days ahead against the Browns, Seahawks, and Packers coming up. So hopefully we'll see a little bit better out of him. And plus, I think he's very talented. So I'm in on him. He is like definitely my number 2 to Pittman, though.
The fact that they came out of the bye and were so healthy, and that is what we saw from that offense, was just terrible. Absolutely terrible. With that said, yeah, I agree with you. Rager is my number 2. I mean, again, I don't think tags had a huge difference between Rager and Pittman. I don't necessarily either, but it's not a 1A, 1B situation. It's a 1 and a 2 for me because I do much prefer Pittman. But yeah, look, Rager was out there for the whole game, pretty much every snap. He played, I think, the same number of snaps as Travis Fulgham. Alshon Jeffrey didn't really cut into anybody's playing time in that offense. I mentioned Fulgham also is a guy who I'd kind of be willing to buy low on earlier on, but he is something where, Yates again made the point of, do you really want to invest in this Eagles offense at the moment? Their schedule sets up pretty nicely, especially that matchup against Seattle. So hopefully, but yeah, I don't know what that was. We have to hope for better days, but I agree. If there were other quarterbacks playing like Carson Wentz was right now, there would be bigger discussions.
It's very strange. And also let's not forget how bad that Sunday night game was against the Cowboys.
Yeah.
One of the worst football games I think I've ever seen. So
that's right.
Definitely overall, he's just been a pretty big disappointment all year. So I don't know, maybe he just needs a better offensive line and he's just a guy that can't be under pressure, but whatever it is.
Well, we should, and you mentioned it. Yeah, the offensive line is abysmal. And I was watching that game, and every single time I watched it, somebody was in his face, immediately. He does hold the ball way too long, just generally speaking, and makes these crazy things where he's backpedaling and be like, no, throw it away now, throw it away. And then he gets hit and fumbles, whatever. But yeah, I agree. With that said, and again, maybe it speaks to this isn't the greatest waiver wire week of all time, but still, right? I mean, that's part of what it is.
I literally made a TikTok about waiver wire today, and the Gen Z came after me. There were a lot of people. So there were, of course, troll comments, I would never take fantasy advice from a woman, and I'm not listening to you, and whatever. But then there was also just a couple people that were like, this list sucks. And I was like, I mean, it's a lean week. I don't know what to tell you. There's 3 guys that maybe you're pretty excited about, and then that's kind of it. So I'm sorry.
You should get on Madden or something, create a player from scratch, and then do a whole thing about this player as your number 1 pickup, and people will be like, yeah, that player sounds great. Also, you have to teach me how to do TikTok, because I've done 1 video on it and I'm pretty sure I did it wrong. So after this, we'll talk. You'll teach me how to do it, because I know.
I love it. Yeah, we need more fantasy people on TikTok. I'm the only person, and I'm not the only. There are people, but it's a very small. It's a very small population. So
all right. Well, I'm probably not the right person to start expanding into it.
So sell yourself short.
Samantha, you can come back anytime you want. I really appreciate it. You're the only person who says anything nice to me. Okay. So we've talked about the 2 big wide receivers to the extent we can really call them that. Any other wide receiver who you're looking at this week? I mean, there are a lot out there, and fantasy managers need some help. Still bye week. So anybody out there that you're looking for help?
There's a few guys that I would look at. I would say Tim Patrick at 24% roster, Josh Reynolds at 5%, and then Jacoby Myers if he happens to be available. I know he doesn't meet your threshold. I usually use 50%. I think he's 48% right now. So
okay, hold on. Myers might be ahead of Pittman for me if he were available, because this is legit. I didn't want to buy into it against the Jets. I mean, you could be a wide receiver for the Patriots in that game, and you'd probably have 100 yards in the score. But against Baltimore in that, I mean, this is the guy at this point. This is a guy you can start. I think if he were available, I think I might prioritize him over Pittman. Would you have him below, but you have him below Pittman and Rager, even if he's available, or would you put him higher?
I guess my real concern, so they do have a good matchup this week in Houston, but my real concern is this Patriots offense just doesn't seem to be firing at all cylinders. It's partially Cam. I mean, Myers hasn't caught a touchdown this year, and I think he's a little just hamstrung by the system. they don't feel comfortable with Cam slinging it down the field, and neither would I. Like,
right.
I mean, every time that guy's in the pocket, I get nervous. And believe me, like, I'm a Panthers fan, so I know this feeling very well. So
Yeah.
I would probably say he's like on that similar tier as like Pittman.
Yeah, I mean, I do like him. I mean, again, to be fair, Cam has thrown 3 touchdowns on the season.
Yeah,
so
right.
I can't, but you shouldn't expect that then if you're Myers. And I do think now Myers, of course, threw the touchdown pass. So at least he's got one. He's got a third of Cam Newton's touchdown passes in the game. But yeah,
sure. But it's like that's not obviously a super reliable thing. Like, it's like Jonnu Smith scoring a rushing touchdown last week, which just annoyed me.
Yeah, I mean, that makes him like one of the best tight ends of the week. It was a horrible week for tight ends.
Absolutely terrible.
Yeah, no, it was terrible. For me, again, Myers, I agree. Like, you know, you sort of have to do this weird dance where there are a lot of offenses where you're like, I don't want any piece of that offense. Just don't want it. It's a gross offense. The Patriots are kind of one of them. But I think Myers, and I guess Harris to a lesser extent now that he's had a couple of good games, Myers has kind of elevated himself just because of the limited targets that there are. His target share is great. Of the limited air yards that there are, his air yard percentage is great. He's a guy who I'm kind of quasi willing to trust at this point. Him and Michael Pittman, I think, would be 1A and 1B. And thank you for mentioning Tim Patrick, by the way, because again, it's like an ongoing feud among all of us over here, because I've always been like, why do you hate Tim Patrick? Tim Patrick's not exciting. He's got the most boring name of all time. Like, I mean, honestly, but
sorry, he's not named like DeBrickashaw Ferguson.
Right. You name him, you give him DeBrickashaw Ferguson's name. He's everybody's number one waiver wire pickup every single week. Tim Patrick just produces. Like, he just does. I get it. Drew Lock is not that good. We don't even know if Drew Lock's going to start this week. Could be Brett Ribbon.
And I don't think there's a big downgrade to Brett Rippon, like, at this point, because like Drew Lock just threw 4 interceptions in that game.
So everybody makes fun of me, but I will say that is the correct answer. That's like my saying. That is the correct answer. Not a huge downgrade necessarily to it. But I agree. For me, Tim Patrick, really everybody there, you know, even KJ Hamler to a lesser extent, but certainly Jerry Jeudy. Tim Patrick is just reliable. Remember, he only got 6 targets in this game, only 4 catches, still, I think, 62 yards. He left early because he beat up somebody, which you can't do in a football game, I get. But you're out early because you've got to fight. You give him the full game. He's probably going to hit 80, 85 yards, something like that. So I agree with you. Thank you for mentioning him. And Josh Reynolds, also another guy who's getting a ton of targets lately, right? Kind of under the radar. Like, I know he played against Seattle. Cooper Kupp's kind of banged up, was in and out a little bit. So I think Josh Reynolds also a nice guy to add right now, especially if you don't absolutely need somebody. They're playing against the Bucs. Bucs are pretty good, but a long-term play. What do you think about?
I just said that he's like a bench stash for this week. If you have room, he's seen 27 targets over the past 3 games. So
what do you think about Sammy Watkins? Because that was a guy who Tags was pretty high on coming into this week, kind of talked me into moving him up my waiver wire rankings. Whereas, again, on our waiver wire show, Scott Engel was like, I will never roster Sammy Watkins under any circumstances. You can't pay me to do it. So what's your opinion on him?
So it's kind of funny because the situation that you were talking about with the Patriots is like the opposite situation, where it's like he's actually in this really great offense and you can make an argument that you just want any sort of stock in that offense because it's Patrick Mahomes and he could feasibly be the like clear number 2. That said, like, I really just worry about him. Like, he is made of glass. He's constantly injured. He's just like a boomer bust guy. I kind of feel like he would be like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling in like my mind, which isn't super, super exciting in terms of waivers this week.
Yes, nor me. I don't want Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I mean, especially with Alan Lazard coming back, but I'm just not buying into that production. Okay, so we're going to get to some questions. We got a ton of them, but not yet. Let's talk about the other 2 positions first. Let's just see if there's anybody out there who you think is worth picking up. Let's start with quarterback. You know, I mean, the name kind of that everybody's talking about now with the Drew Brees injury is Jameis Winston. Is that your number 1 guy if you're in need of a quarterback this week?
Well, so above your threshold is Tua 45% rostered. So I would look for him first as like a more like rest of season thing if you really need like some kind of depth there, because they do have a really good schedule down the line. But that said, Jameis Winston, yeah, I mean, he is it's crazy because I didn't even really see this like ribs injury happen. And after the game, Sean Payton's just like, oh, he's like a little banged up. He has 5 rib fractures
Yep.
and a punctured lung. Like,
Yep.
what? Like, totally insane. These guys are so tough. But like, I mean, I saw a stat today that's like Drew Brees is ranks 32nd since 2019 in average depth of target, and Jameis Winston ranks first. So I think we all miss him a little bit. Like, you may hate him, but like I think you have to have some kind of like melancholy with like Winston after like how many years he kind of has like been so great for fantasy.
Yes.
And I just think like the matchup is amazing against Atlanta, who are allowing like probably top 2 or top 3 points to opposing quarterbacks. And it's in an awesome system where they have a million weapons, where like, even if they want to play it safe, like Michael Thomas is the like king of slant routes. So like, or like just throw it to Alvin Kamara, like 1 yard past the line of scrimmage, and that still counts for Jameis. So I think he's definitely a really like high upside ad this week.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, you called it correctly. They're so tough. Yeah, it's just like, oh, I don't know. Like I guess he's a little banged up. We're not even calling him. It's like, oh yeah, he has no ribs that work anymore. They're just all broken, and the lung. I'm going to be surprised if we see Drew Brees back, at least in the fantasy. Hopefully he's back before the very end of the season and maybe the playoffs. I'm going to be surprised at this point if you're going to see him back in time to do anything in fantasy. So I would assume if you're adding Jameis Winston, you are adding him for the long term. And I think he's probably going to be a borderline QB1 going forward. And you mentioned the matchup with Atlanta. They get them twice in the next 3 weeks, twice out of the next 3 weeks. It's going to be a guy you're going to want to start. So yeah. And again, we need some YOLO, we need some you only live once going on here.
We really do. And we've also seen like what Teddy Bridgewater did in this similar situation, stepping in for Brees, won all 5 games. So I'm convinced that like Sean Payton will find a way for him to not turn over the ball 30 times in 4 games or whatever.
Let's just hope that Taysom Hill does not come in and is like, look out. It's my show now. I've been waiting for this the whole time. But
I hate it.
We did. We're going to get to a listener question or somebody who's watching a question about it. There's a good question. I do want to, pick your brain a little bit about Taysom Hill. But first, let's talk about some tight ends who are available here on the waiver wire. Is there anybody who you think is worth picking up this week who's widely available?
Yeah, so this tight end landscape, as we alluded to just now, is just like absolutely brutal. Yep. Like it was like Gronk, Brait, and then Hunter Henry, Richard Rodgers, and then Logan Thomas. So he's the guy that I'm going to mention here at 35% rostered, caught 4 of 6 passes for 66 yards. Like literally that ranked him like 5th or 6th for the week. So like that's embarrassing. But I mean, he continues to see a steady workload week to week and has Cincy and Dallas on deck. So the Bengals have given up the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So I think he's a really attractive streamer. Like, yeah, the Washington football team offense is not like a really exciting one. But that said, like, I think the targets are there and the talent's there. So like it's a lean week on the waivers. So if you need a streamer, like I think he's a good option.
Yes. I mean, all your tight ends suck. That's just kind of the name of the game. They do. If you have Travis Kelce, I mean, I'd wonder if we were redrafting right now and we knew everything we knew about this, year, where Kelce would go, because he gives you such a ridiculous advantage over the rest of the field with George Kittle's injury. Because even Darren Waller, who's the clear cut, maybe Mark Andrews, you can't rely on that. You don't feel comfortable every week that they're going to give you guaranteed production. Thomas, he's getting the targets sort of again, and Alex Smith is playing competently out there. So, he's the number one. Jordan Reed's on a bye this week. Everybody loves Jordan Reed, who produces when he plays and when he does not leave the game injured. George Kittle's out for a while. Long term, do you think Reed is going to be somebody who maybe can be above the, oh God, I can't possibly roster you threshold, and somebody who maybe you might want to start?
Yeah, I actually do. So I left him off my waiver column this week just because he is on bye. But if you do have the space and are really in need and just have like a completely yucky tight end situation, like, and there are a lot of guys, like you could have Hayden Hurst or I don't know, like a number of basically every tight end that I have right now on my teams. Yeah. So I mean, I think that he could be, the 49ers like to use tight ends. He has been extremely productive, like you said, when he is able to play. So I like him obviously way more than say Ross Dwelly in that system. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Are you ready to get to some questions? I got a lot of them. right now. You ready
Exciting.
to go?
Yeah.
I love it. I can't wait. Okay. From and I'm terrible with pronunciations of names. That's why I can't ask them how they pronounce their names like I did you 40 times before we started and then pretended like I just knew it. Okay, from Avi Brandel, would you drop J.K. Dobbins to pick up Nyheim Hines?
Ooh. Oh, I hate it. Me, probably.
Ooh, we stumped you on the first one. I love it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, probably. I actually think, I mean, it's a committee situation, but I actually think Nyheim Hines is in a slightly better situation than the whole Baltimore backfield. So if that is literally your only option to do, like, I would absolutely consider it.
Yeah, I think the way you put that is really good in that I would like to hold on to Dobbins if I can. And I don't know why. Probably the same reason I want to hold on to
emotional.
It is, right? And that's not what we're supposed to be, okay? We're supposed to be logical, cutthroat, okay? We'll make a TikTok video about how we're supposed to be. But literally, you are supposed to take emotion out of it. And I'm just like, Dobbins is really talented, man. If it happens, if it works, and maybe the fact that the offense isn't working means they're going to just turn it over to him a little bit. But realistically, you know, you're going to want to start Hines this week over Dobbins. So it is something where if that is the only move that you can make, I'd be fine to make it. From Yvette Vargas, would you trade away James Robinson and Chase Edmonds for Aaron Jones and Noah Fant? I'm going to assume that Yvette needs a tight end, I guess. You know, it's always tough when you don't know who it's replacing, but let's say they've got, you know, one of the terrible tight ends. So you give away James Robinson, Chase Edmonds, get Aaron Jones and Noah Fant.
I mean, if you really need a tight end, like just on face value, I don't really love this trade just because Fant has not looked great since coming back from injury. I mean, we've talked about how bad the tight ends are, like if you really, really need a guy, but I mean, yeah, Aaron Jones has been great this year, but so is James Robinson. And I'm like really excited about him for the rest of the season, and especially with like the quarterback situation so up in the air, it just seems like he is like such a safe play because the quarterback play has been so bad. Yep. So it's, I mean, I don't think that he's one-to-one with Aaron Jones or anything, but like if we're talking about like Chase Edmonds, I don't know, I would probably say no, I wouldn't do that trade unless you really, really need a tight end.
I don't think it's that far between James Robinson and Aaron Jones. Like in a vacuum, yeah, I'll take Jones. I'll take Jones, but it's really close. I mean, Robinson, there's zero reason to doubt Robinson at this point. And Edmonds, although Kenyon Drake is back, I mean, Edmonds is still going to factor in, and he's a high-end handcuff. So depending on what your tight end situation is, if you're in one of these leagues where everybody's rostering a backup tight end and you just desperately need somebody to start, okay, Fant is probably a guy who I'm going to rank as a starter each week. But I agree with you. In a vacuum, I probably wouldn't. From Curtis Bruce, and this is the question I want to ask. The question is, should I pick up Taysom Hill? But the question that I'm going to augment for you, Samantha, is whether or not if Taysom Hill is tight end eligible in your league, would you pick up Taysom Hill?
If he is tight end eligible, if you're playing in ESPN, which I assume he is still tight end eligible there, I think I don't know if it's real. I saw someone say that they might remove that, but assuming he's tight end eligible, I would consider him. I mean, really, like we have talked about how crappy the landscape is for tight ends. So, I mean, yeah, as much as I dislike Taysom Hill just for fantasy, I'm sure he's a great guy in like real life.
We are not insulting Taysom Hill, the human being. Okay, we are pro Taysom Hill, just fantasy.
Very. But yeah, so if he's tight end eligible, I pick him up. No, if you're like if you need him as like a quarterback, just no.
Yeah, I would. We actually had a listener question on the podcast I recorded right before I started it, and it was, would Taysom Hill rank as a top 12 tight end rest of season? And I kind of think the answer is yes, because I think he's going to factor in so much with Jameis Winston that given whoever the 12th tight end is my ranking rest of season, like Robert Tonyan, who I have no sort of, I'm not confident in starting. Yeah, I'd rather roll out Taysom Hill and I'll have some crazy fun with it. Anyway, from Kenneth King, should I trade Kareem Hunt or Miles Sanders?
Kareem Hunt for Miles Sanders?
Yeah, who do you prefer basically of the two?
I think that's really close, but I would probably still prefer Hunt. So I think a lot of people are probably scared off by the fact that Chubb is back. But that said, he actually seems to do better when Chubb's there. It just seems like the Cleveland offense, like they want to be pounding the rock and running a ton. And it just seems like they kind of complement each other rather. So it's really close, but that said, I would probably lean Hunt also just because of how crappy we've talked about this Philly offensive line is.
Yeah,
So it's a little
yeah.
concerning.
I mean, we could be looking at Sanders a little differently if they didn't take him out right before that touchdown and then give it to Corey Clement for his lone carry of the day to get that touchdown. To me, this is, and I say this all the time, I'm not a fan of trading 1-for-1, same position, same tier. Like, I'm just not. Like,
it's pretty much the same to me. So I don't think that you're really getting too much value either way.
Right. I think if I were picking one, I'd probably narrowly, I guess, pick Sanders, but I probably wouldn't do that trade either way. Like, I'd be like, no, I'm good with what I have. From Batmac Gaming, would you trade Chris Godwin to get Jamison Crowder?
No, I feel like, do we forget how good Chris Godwin is?
Yeah.
I know, I think Jamison Crowder is in the conversation as like a week-to-week starter, at least. I mean, there are a number of pieces kind of coming back though and looking decent for the Jets. I know that sounds weird to say anything complimentary about the Jets, but like Denzel Mims is there. He led the team in targets last week, and Brashad Perriman is back. So I like the Tampa offense way better as well too. Like, do you really trust Joe Flacco or whoever they have rolling out for the Jets? Like, I mean, like I said, I think that Crowder's in that conversation for as a week-to-week starter, but like Godwin just feels like a better play rest of season.
I said I don't like trading players at the same position in the same tier. That is not what we're doing here. We are in different tiers, in my opinion. Godwin is definitely, up there ahead of Crowder. Now, I get that it was Crowder's first game, back off of injury, I believe, but he only had, I think, 2 targets, made a spectacular touchdown catch against the Patriots. But this is just, it's not an offense that you want a piece of if you can necessarily avoid, of course. And again, Joe Flacco will start again this week, which wasn't that bad for the offense the last time they played, but still Godwin is in the tier above Crowder.
That game just like turned back the clock. Like I was like, this is like vintage Joe Flacco here.
Right. And I mean, everybody who listens to our pod and watches our videos know I am a Jets fan. I'm from Queens, so I am a Jets fan, and thank you for that. Thank you. I want the 0-16 season though. I've had 1-15. All right. I've seen that season. It's fine. It's not that exciting. Give me the 0-16 season. So my kids are getting a huge kick out of me, like screaming for the Patriots to beat the Jets, because this is how I roll right now. From New Life, is Kalen Ballage worth a waiver wire add and a potential start as either a flex or an RB2?
Well, it's looking like Austin Eckler could be back for this game. I actually don't know exactly what his status is.
I'm just gonna, sorry, I don't mean to cut off, but I'm almost positive he's not gonna be back for this game. I know he had that tweet that he sent out. We have an injury, Dr. David Chow, who pops on our podcast. He thinks it's at least another week past this, given that he was only running in a straight line. So let's assume that Eckler's out this week, because I feel pretty confident that he's going to be out.
Okay. So under that assumption that, Eckler and Jackson, who's on IR, this is a really great start, actually. So Kalen Ballage, not an exciting name, not the greatest, yard per carry type guy, but it's the Jets. He led the team in carries last week. They seem to just hate Joshua Kelly for like whatever reason. And he was also involved in the passing game. So that gives you a little bit of a higher floor as well. So I do think that he is a worthwhile add if given that Eckler is out. He was also in my waiver column this week.
I mean, second consecutive revenge game, right? He was on the Jets for a hot minute there. He's ready to go.
Minute, yeah.
Yeah. No,
revenge game against Adam Gase.
Yes. I think the whole league has a revenge game against Adam Gase every week. Okay, so I agree with you completely. He would definitely be an add. He'd be right up there. He is somebody who you can start reliably. And again, that is 2020. Kalen Ballage, a reliable RB2 coming into this week. From Roman A, somebody in my league dropped Raheem Mostert. I'm running on running back handcuffs only. How much fab would you use for him? Now, they have a bye coming up this week. Sounds like he's going to be back next week. So how hard would you go after Raheem Mostert here?
I would be willing to spend almost everything that you had left. Yeah. I think he's close to return. He will probably return for this week. So I just feel like Yeah, I mean, when he's on the field, he is at least an RB2 and he has RB1 upside. So especially if you have guys that are just like handcuff guys as your other options, like he is the clear cut option.
Yeah, I think once he comes back, Mostert is going to be a guy you can start out there pretty reliably going forward. So I would definitely waste as much as you can. If you have $0 bids, spend the rest that you have and get by on $0 bids, because at this point, just there's no need to save it. Just go after who you need to go after. So we mentioned this is very close to what we said earlier, but again, it's a Dobbins question, and Dobbins is kind of right on that border. From Dylan Valencia, should I keep J.K. Dobbins, or would you drop him to get Kalen Ballage, who we just talked about?
Oh, that seems even grosser. I don't know. If you need I would say if you need to win this week, like if you are literally on the cusp, like you are 5-5, 4-6 at this point, like I would probably say yes, get Kalen Ballage just because he's in a better situation for this week. Yep. But I'm not convinced, down the line he is. So it's probably just depends on if you need the immediate win.
I do get a lot of questions about Kalen Ballage. So I guess let me ask you this. Assume Eckler, whether or not it's this week, whether or not it's next week, and you want to talk about Ballage's value long-term, do you think he's going to factor in long-term? Because again, look, Justin Jackson's on IR. You aptly put it. They despise Joshua Kelly. They never viewed Austin Eckler as this bell cow, take every single running back touch in this game. So do you think Ballage can still have independent value even when Eckler returns?
I do think he will have some independent value. I don't think he'll be like completely a non-factor. I think that especially the way the Chargers just have been using running backs, it just seems like they like to use some kind of committee. So while I think if Eckler's back, he'll get the lion's share of the carries, maybe like 60-40 or something like that. So, and that would be a pretty good outcome for Ballage considering he was like, take it off the street. So.
Right. God, ridiculous. But that is the reason why I would drop Dobbins for Ballage, because I do think that as much as Ballage is going to be a good start this week, maybe even next week, he's going to have longer term value, because I do think he's a guy you can probably get away with starting if you absolutely have to. Next question from Joel Matthew. Should I use my top waiver wire spot? This is something fantasy managers hold on to like it's gold, right? They don't want to burn that number one waiver wire spot. Would you burn your number one waiver wire spot on either Savon Ahmed or Winston? Because he only has Drew. Now he says he has Drew Lock as his backup. So I assume he's picking up Winston not to start, but only as a backup. So would you waste your top waiver wire pickup on either Ahmed or Winston?
Probably Ahmed. If that's your backup situation, like assuming this is a one quarterback league, I don't think it's like Drew Lock may miss a game. And yeah, we've talked about Jameis Winston. We think he's really high upside, but like, I don't think that he's like a QB1 rest of season. Like I'm not ready to say that yet. So I would probably stick with the running back if you already have a guy for this week.
Yep, I agree with that. But I do think Ahmed is worth it because stop hoarding your number one waiver wire priority. By the way, there is something that we should at least get out there. We are in week 11, right? That means by my math, next week is week 12. How many fantasy managers in your league are still going to be alive for a playoff spot at that point? You're no longer going to be competing with 12 other fantasy managers or 10 or 16 or however many are in your league. There's going to be at least 2 or 3, probably more, who are just going to be checked out. So your waiver wire priority isn't quite as important because you're not going against everybody in the league. You're going against like 50% or something a little less. So just want to point that out because I know fantasy managers hold that waiver wire claim like it's gold. From Doug S., what are the top bench stash running back handcuffs? Who would you pick out of Alexander Madison, Tony Pollard, Devontae Booker, or somebody else?
Probably Pollard, just because I think we've seen kind of like Zeke's health be up in the air. And it also just kind of worries me like with the way the passing game has been for the Cowboys without Dak there. It's been definitely like anemic. We've seen Dalton. I think we all kind of hoped that he would be like an average guy, and he wasn't average. He was below average, and he's coming back this week. So it feels like they're going to be running a lot more, and Zeke can't carry all of the water for that team. Right. So I think that he would probably be my top guy of those guys. Madison worries me because he was given that perfect opportunity when Dalvin Cook was out, and he like did absolutely nothing with it. We have seen though in the past that he's been good, so I would probably rank him second and then Booker.
Yeah, this is where I do my patented Harris shoulder shrug, whereas like I don't really have a preference. Like Tony Pollard and Alexander Madison are going to be like right there for me. Both guys who need to be rostered in every league because they are going to become. I know Madison burned everybody that one game he started where it was like, this is the guy who's going to be my savior, and then he did absolutely nothing. Forget about it. Okay, that does not mean that he's not going to be able to provide value after that. Devontae Booker is also a good guy that this commenter mentioned, because I do think that if something were to happen to Josh Jacobs, Booker would have tremendous value. And don't drop Chase Edmonds yet. I know he didn't excel when Kenyon Drake was out of the lineup, but he got like 28 touches or whatever it is. So you do want somebody in that offense. So I would hold in that scenario if you count him as a quote unquote handcuff. From the Mosgoth, again, I may mispronounce it, my bad. As much as everyone is hyping Pittman Jr., and you and I have talked about him, isn't Paris Campbell coming back relatively soon? And how do you feel about him? And do you think that'll cap Michael Pittman Jr.'s value?
I think they play different roles in this offense. I think if I'm mistaken, please tell me, but I feel like Paris Campbell plays more out of the slot. So I just feel like that doesn't really impact it too much. It seems like Pittman has better chemistry with Phillip Rivers versus some of the other guys. So I don't really think that impacts it too much for me.
Yep, I agree. Also, I'm not sure exactly when Paris Campbell is going to come back. And even when he comes back, I don't think you're going to expect him to come into just an every down role. I mean, it was a very serious injury when he got hurt. Even if there was the threat of him coming back imminently, it wouldn't impact Michael Pittman Jr. I think this is the guy who they're going to know. I mean, just look at how explosive he is. Nobody else in that offense has that, upside. And I liked Paris Campbell a lot coming in, but this is Pittman Jr. Don't worry about Paris Campbell whatsoever. From Joel Matthew, would you keep Justin Jackson, or is he droppable?
I mean, it just depends on your roster situation, but he is droppable in my mind. I think we're at the pretty much end of the season. He's at least going to miss, I believe, this week. So it's, if you need the roster space, I really don't hate it. I think he'll be mixed in with that weird running back committee that we just mentioned, but I don't know what his prognosis is for return. So he's droppable in my mind.
Yep. Completely agree. Obviously, if you have an IR spot and you can stash him, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
But by the time he's really ready to do anything, Eckler will be back. So I would not worry about him at all for the rest of the season. From Pablo Ramos, I have Jared Cook. There are a lot of frustrated Jared Cook managers out there. Would you rather pick up Taysom Hill and start him rest of season over Jared Cook at tight end?
No, I don't know. Maybe both don't feel really safe to me. I was low on Cook going into the season. I want to say I thought that he was really due for a big touchdown regression. It was a crazy number of touchdowns last year. So I thought most people were a little too high on him. I mean, he's I feel like just because he's part of that Saints offense, he falls in that borderline tight end one range, but also that's a commentary on how bad tight end is. So, I mean, if you really believe in Taysom Hill and he's tight end eligible, and I mean, I don't hate it, but I don't love either of the options.
I'd probably hold Cook, but if you're bored and you want to have fun, starting Taysom Hill at tight end is fun. So spice it up.
You only live once.
YOLO. That's going to be everything about the Saints is going to be YOLO. Okay, we're gonna find a way to start Jameis Winston at running back or something like that. From DJ Million NYC, I love it. Would you drop, if you want to pick up Michael Pittman Jr., would you drop Antonio Brown for him?
Yeah, I probably would. I think there are more mouths to feed on the Tampa offense, and we've really hyped Pittman up this whole podcast. I'm not going to reiterate every single thing, but he just seems to have the pedigree, the chemistry, all of that seems to be working. And yeah, I mean, there are a lot of mouths to feed on the Tampa offense. So I don't really love Brown rest of season. So I probably would take Pittman over Brown.
I think I'm going to hold Brown. I'm actually a little worried about this whole off the field stuff that they're now investigating. I don't know what the outcome of that is going to be necessarily, but if I knew that Brown was going to play rest of the season, I'd probably hold Brown. I think that offense can support 3 wide receivers, but my guess on my rest of season rankings, which again, I have out right now, but I'm going to dive into as soon as this is done. When I do a trade chart, they're going to be very close. So I'm good with either one. I'd probably slightly prefer Brown. From Simi Buckets 23, would you prefer Damian Harris or Jonathan Taylor rest of season?
Oh, ew.
Yes. That's the correct answer, actually.
This hurts, but I'm probably going to say Damian Harris.
Yeah.
And just being realistic at this point.
Yeah.
It's sad, but yeah, I think we're at that point with Jonathan Taylor, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think
he's like a low end RB2 in the right matchups. And that's like really that's a ceiling, I think, for Taylor at this point. Yeah. Whereas like Harris just seems to have control of that backfield. It's a little bit game script dependent just because he's not involved in the passing game, but I like Harris's situation much better.
Yeah. Hope is a dangerous thing right now for fantasy managers. And I think Jonathan Taylor, as much as I'm guilty of it, as you mentioned, it's emotional. Jonathan Taylor is hope. That's all it is. There's no reason to expect him to have a role in this backfield going forward, whereas Harris does and will going forward. He looks great. They know what they have in him right now. So regardless of Sony Michel, Harris is going to be kind of a guy who you can start. So, yeah, I would go with him as well. From TM, what do you guys think about DJ Chark? Is this guy ever going to gain more consistency?
I mean, I don't want to take last week as as a data point, really. First of all, they have a guy that like Jake Luton throwing to him. So that's, I think, part of the problem. But also, there was a lot of weather in that game. I think we kind of knew that going into the game. Not that Green Bay's defense is really that strong, but at the same time, I don't want to use that as a data point. Hopefully we can get some kind of consistency. It's just, it's this offense too. I mean, like Jacksonville's just basically playing for a draft spot at this point. So they're not an exciting offense that you want a lot of parts of. So, I mean, he's still a guy. It's not a really great rosy situation in Jacksonville.
I think if you're looking for consistency, you are looking in the wrong place. Yes. But I do think he is somebody you can start. And again, Chark, he didn't have an absolutely terrible game with Luton in that wind. It was horrible. And again, he did beat the defense at one point, and Luton's got a really strong arm. They were just going in the wrong direction, that field, and the wind kind of knocked it down. Other than that, it's like a 70-yard touchdown pass. So I do think he's a guy who you can start most weeks. I'm not sure this week necessarily against Pittsburgh with a rookie quarterback, somebody who you really want to go after, but you roster Chark regardless. From Casey, Ronald Jones is on my waiver wire, and I have the first priority. Would you prefer Ronald Jones or Nyheim Hines?
Ronald Jones. He feels like a lock for RB2 rest of season over Leonard Fournette at this point, and that's kind of like what you're hoping for with Hines. Which there's a path to that, but at the same time, I think it's safer to say that Ronald Jones is the guy.
I don't know which was crazier in that game. The fact that he had, I think, the longest run in Bucks history, or the fact that he got any touches after he fumbled after that first drive. Everything about that game was insane, and yet 100%. You go for Rojo over Nyheim Hines without question. Might drive you a little nuts, but still stick with Rojo. From Christopher Allegria, do you drop David Johnson on IR now with the concussion out at least the next 2 games?
I mean, if you need a win in the next 2 weeks, like if you're not 7-3 or 8-2 at this point, like, and you're not a lock, I could definitely see a case for dropping him, like, and picking up Hines, for instance, if he happens to be on your waiver wire. It would hurt, but like, you kind of have to just play for the here and now for some teams. If you are on that cusp and you need that win, then I could see why you would drop him.
Samantha, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes I feel like I have an instinct as to what I want to say, and then I'm faced with the actual real life situation, and I don't do it, so I know what it is. Somebody dropped David Johnson in one of my leagues. I don't think I'm going to pick him up. Like, I might, but I don't really have the room to necessarily stash him or pick him up. So for me, yeah, you can drop him if you need the room whatsoever. Last question here. Would you, from Kali Music, would you drop Duke Johnson, who's got the starting role for at least another 2 games, to pick up any one of Damian Harris, Kalen Ballage, or Savon Ahmed?
I would probably drop him for Damian Harris for sure. I think that, yes, while he has the starting role, he's never been given like a huge workload in the past. And he did kind of burn fantasy managers last week. So I could absolutely see an argument to be made for Harris. And if you happen, yeah, I mean, I actually don't know. I don't have their schedules in front of me, but yeah, I don't hate that.
Samantha, you were the first guest ever on our Waiver Wire live stream. You did a fantastic job. I can't thank you enough for coming on. Remind everybody where they can find more of you and your awesome work.
Sure. Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Samantha NFL. I co-host a podcast called the Deep Sleepers podcast. Also on TikTok for any of my millennial or Gen Z fans out there, at Sprevite, Sprevite, Instagram, all those things. So yeah, follow me there, and hope that you enjoy some of that weird nonsense and stream of consciousness that I tweet out.
Stream of consciousness is the best type of consciousness. Again, really appreciate you joining us. I hope everybody enjoyed the live stream. If you did, give us a like on the bottom, maybe click that subscribe button. That really helps us out. We'll be back on Thursday, of course, with the Start Sit live stream, and somebody, not me, either Yates or perhaps Tags, will talk to you then.